friend Ava Chipiuk. She's a lawyer for civil liberties. We got to know her during the pandemic lockdown and the civil liberties bonfire that ensued. She was a lawyer for individual truckers, and she was actually there, if I'm not mistaken, at the public order inquiry into the Emergencies Act. She challenged the government for its imposition. As we know, it was later found to be illegal and unconstitutional. The Federal Court of Canada ruled that putting Canada under a form of martial law was unconstitutional, and in particular, Justice Mosley of the federal court focused on the bank seizures. Imagine the scattergun, shotgun approach of just getting names of individual truckers, usually by trolling the media. Oh, the CBC named this guy, the CBC named that guy. Sending those names to banks and saying, cut off their entire family. Because, of course, many families have a joint bank account. Mom and dad share the same funds. So mom is at the grocery store and suddenly none of her credit cards work when she's trying to check out. It was that invasion of banking privacy, that lack of any system that caused the Emergencies Act to be declared illegal. Well, here's a wrinkle that maybe you haven't expected. Ava Chipiuk, the same lawyer, had her own bank account most recently shut down. They said it was for questionable transactions, but that sounds very fishy to me, and it reminds me of when Rebel News had our mortgage application scuppered by the Royal Bank. We were approved by the branch, but the national office said that we had a reputational risk. Is that where we are in Canada now? That a lawyer who dares challenge the government on behalf of a client finds herself debanked? Well, I read a very interesting essay on the subject just the other day. The headline is, Ottawa's Emergencies Act proved how quickly bank accounts can be weaponized. And then our author, who we're going to speak with in a minute, is in Alberta. And so he says, Alberta must act now to protect its citizens. What does he mean? Well, we'll go to the man himself. I'm talking about Marco Navarro-Genie. He is the VP of Research with the Frontier Centre for Public Policy. Great to see you again, Marco. Thanks for taking the time. It's been a very long time. It's great to have you back.
Likewise. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Now, tell me a little bit about Ava Chipiuk. We know her as a civil liberties lawyer. How did this whole banking thing come about? I mean, I read the story elsewhere. Did she give you any insights about how it went down, how they banned her? Did they do what they did to us, which is sort of not give us any info, just keep us in the dark?
She basically sent a letter which she published on X, basically letting her know that she had X number of days to put her affairs in order because they were basically shutting her down. They didn't say much more than that, and she hasn't really communicated much more than that because she may potentially sue, and so she's keeping tight-lipped about it.
And I understand. Now, it's tough suing a bank. It's an uphill battle. There is a notion that a bank doesn't have to do business with you because it's not a government agency, but they're so highly regulated. They really are like a public utility in a way. I mean, they're so heavily regulated. There's so few of them. They have such power over us as individuals. And they're so closely in sync with the government. When Chrystia Freeland demanded that the banks seize people's accounts, none of them refused. None of them said, we need a legal process. So I don't know. I think that she'll have a tough time suing. And I find banks in this country very unresponsive to customers. They're more interested in what the government says. And let me throw one more thing at you. I'd love your comment on this. Mark Carney, when the lockdowns and when martial law was imposed, he wrote an essay in the Globe and Mail, and I know you referenced this in your op-ed. He said the government should go further in a way. He called the truckers seditionists. I mean, he absolutely supported the bank seizures and wanted the government to go further. So this is a real risk, isn't it?
It is very significant. Look, let's start with the Cartney and maybe walk backwards. Carney may be, in some respects, the source of the idea of including these kinds of tactics into the Emergencies Act. We know that he's pretty tight with Chrystia Freeland. Freeland is the godmother of one of his children, or some arrangement like that. So it's not just people who dissent, essentially. It could be anyone who has an idea that doesn't quite fit with the government, anyone who promotes some idea that is opposed to some policy in government. So that's bad enough. But Carney came out, as you pointed out, and said that essentially people who protest government policy, namely the truckers in this case, are seditionists. He's saying that they're traitors to the crown and to Canada. And so that's in part what prompted me to write this, because if this keeps going, and he is now the chief legislator of the country and the most powerful political figure in the country, then Canadians would have no recourse. And so it got me thinking, well, how could Canadians under these kinds of circumstances now find ways to protect themselves? And that's why I started thinking about the sort of not quite parallel system, but there is a different kind of banking system that is regulated by provinces. And Quebec has probably the strongest one. I would say Alberta, not too far back from that. And so in the op-ed, I urged the Alberta government and Premier Smith to figure out ways to establish barriers against this kind of federal abuse.
Yeah, I'll talk about those in 1 second, but you just made me remember. I mean, I remember seeing Mark Carney's op-ed during the trucker convoy and during the Emergencies Act, and I didn't think much of it. I thought, oh, some former central banker here is weighing in from the UK. I don't really care. But I forgot that he was an advisor to the government. I forgot he was godfather to Chrystia Freeland's, or vice versa. There was some family connection there. And of course, when it comes to using banking as a weapon, who would know better than the former chief, central banker of Canada? He would know how to use finance as a weapon. I think it is very plausible that the idea to seize and freeze bank accounts came from Mark Carney. He was writing about it. He called people seditionists, and he would have, his first thoughts would be about weaponizing banking. But let's talk about the possible solution, and it's an Alberta-centric solution. I don't know if there are other provinces where the province literally owns a bank, but that's part of the legacy of Alberta that goes back almost 100 years during the dirty 30s, the Great Depression, when banks were failing, when banks were not giving out loans. The Alberta government, under the Social Credit Party, if my history is correct, created a bank called the Alberta Treasury Branches. And because of that background, because of that provenance, I think it's politically been difficult for conservative governments who might otherwise privatize it, but it has sort of a legacy. And there are some parts of the province that really love the ATB. And so the government itself has a bank. And I don't know if that's common. I don't know of any other government-owned banks in Canada. So if Alberta has a government-owned bank, you lay out things that government-owned bank could do to be a kind of firewall to stop Mark Carney or others from doing that again. Why don't you give us some examples? And by the way, correct me if I've got my ATB facts wrong, but I think I'm right.
No, you're absolutely right. It was created in 1938, essentially to protect Albertans against what was seen to be the abusive power of Laurentian banks in central Canada. So the parallels here are very much pertinent. Let me backtrack a bit before ATB and say that there is a system of, in Quebec, they call them the Caisse Populaire, right? Mm-hmm. They are essentially banking co-ops. And they are all federated, and they're kind of a monolith that is regulated by an act of the province. And they're regulated also by something called the Autorité des Marchés Financiers, which is a single regulator. And so they offer a formidable wall against that kind of overreach because they're strictly regulated by the province. We don't have quite that strong a setup in Alberta. And so I went and I looked at ATB precisely because ATB is a branch of the provincial government. But in reality, just about any province can do that if they wished and if they have co-ops and sort of that kind of parallel banking. The Alberta government, because it controls ATB, then is uniquely positioned to go even further. Because it owns the Alberta Treasury Branch and therefore can directly order the Alberta Treasury Branch never to cut off Albertans from their financial services. But also, Alberta has something even greater than that, and it's called the Sovereignty Act, the Alberta Sovereignty Act. And under the Sovereignty Act, it's actually called the Sovereignty Act within a united Canada because we don't want to give the impression that we want to separate. Alberta can legally refuse to enforce federal measures that directly infringe the constitutional rights of Albertans. And so this places this kind of federal shenanigans directly in conflict with the purposes of the Alberta Sovereignty Act. And that's why, in this respect, in addition to the other tools, Alberta is probably best positioned to fight this kind of abuses.
So give me an example. Let's say, God forbid, we would have another lockdown and there would be protesters from Alberta. And maybe it's a climate lockdown this time. I don't know. Maybe it's some rule you're not allowed to walk in the forest, something insane like that, just to pick a random idea. So let's say we have a second round of this, because I think a lot of politicians learned the wrong lessons from the lockdown. They thought it went well. They realized what they could get away with. What would the ATB do, or what would the government of Alberta give us some specific examples of how they could push back at a Mark Carney bank raid? What could they do really specifically?
Let me give you an example of something that has happened, and then that'll probably illustrate things a little bit better. We know, for example, that the federal government has essentially enlarged its list of weapons that they want to confiscate from Canadians. And this happened even before the enacting of the Alberta Sovereignty Act. The Attorney General in Jason Kenney's government issued orders to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the federal police, not to seize weapons that were lawfully procured and legally possessed. And he cited essentially this duty that the Alberta government has to protect the property and the rights of Canadians. So there is, outside of the new act, that precedent. In terms of now the banking, for example, if the federal government issued orders on the basis of national security or emergencies or the Criminal Code of Canada, there isn't really a heck of a lot that Alberta or any province could do in the long run to stop the feds. But what it can do is take the fight to them to make it politically unsavory and very difficult to enact that kind of abuse. So they could, for example, instruct the Alberta Treasury branches to make sure that political neutrality is always the main issue, right? That no one, because of their political views or religious views or any dealings that have nothing to do with criminal issues, would prevent anybody from having banking, the right to bank. The other one, of course, is that Alberta could instruct the bank, namely the Alberta Treasury Branch, not to do any of those sorts of things without due process, because that's kind of part of the problem now. Remove the reputational risk issue, which also is, as you pointed out, has happened to you as well. It should make sure that people are notified directly when this is going to happen, so that they're not just simply, found with their proverbial pants down. And they could enact a Financial Rights Act to protect Albertans from being denied services that otherwise would be lawful activity. The feds could do a whole bunch of things to make their life miserable. They already do. But this is about essentially standing up to a bully.
Yeah. I mean, imagine that. Like literally, you're in the checkout of the grocery store, and none of your cards work. Like just imagine the humiliation, the fear. Did I miss a payment? Did I do something wrong? Like you say, there was no notice. It was a sneak attack. There was
Yeah.
no legal process. There was no customer relations process. Hey, there's one thing I want to ask you, and I appreciate your time. It's been on my mind ever since it happened a few weeks ago. The United States, the president issued an executive order banning banks from using political or religious tests for, quote, reputational risk. And they gave specific examples of how that had been done. Christian bank customers, pro MAGA, pro Trump, pro firearms, like a lot of things that are politically flavorful but not illegal at all. Banks were using those as a criterion to debank people. It's listed right there in the executive order. And now the Trump administration has not only told banks they can't do it, but it's authorized regulators to go to inspect banks and even go back historically. So I think that's a pretty big deal. I don't know if that would apply to Canadian banks, because a lot of Canadian banks do business in the States. Is that considered a different entity? I don't know, like the Royal Bank that debanked us. They do a lot of business in the States. You mentioned TD Bank does. But here's the thing, even if the U.S. executive order doesn't apply to Canadian banks, I think that the government of Alberta should issue a very similar directive to the ATB itself. I don't know if ATB uses political or religious screening, but they should be ordered not to and just have it codified. What do you think of that? Just baby steps, and maybe Premier Smith can say, all right, we're doing this ourselves, and I challenge the Royal Bank and Scotiabank and TD Bank and all the other banks to adopt this ethical code of conduct. Like, I think, why shouldn't the province of Alberta demand that the CEOs sign a pledge to remove political and religious bigotry from their lending? I mean, why not? And by the way, I think that would be wildly popular. Everyone hates the banks, and a lot of the time for good reason.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Yeah, the presidential order came on August the 7th, so literally 2 weeks from today, 2 weeks ago, and it's called the Guaranteeing Fair Banking for All Americans. So it kind of gives you a flavor of it. I also don't know exactly how it would apply to Canadian banks who operate in the United States. The Toronto-Dominion Bank, the Royal Bank, they have wide presence in the United States. But ultimately, yeah, it probably doesn't exonerate them either because they're foreign banks. What is interesting about the presidential order for Canada and in application even to Canadian banks is that it makes it clear that there is an affirmation that financial access is now a kind of a civil liberty, not a privilege, not something that is dependent on the largesse of the state, but it must be exercised as part of your citizenship. And so it recognizes also, because Eva Chipiuk is not the only case. I learned from a tweet that Tamara Leach put out that the Alberta Treasury Branch denied her even the right, not the right, but she was not allowed even to make an appointment to open an account.
So the ATB itself, the government bank itself, well, then it certainly does need that kind of code of ethics. Isn't that very interesting?
Absolutely.
Very interesting.
And so Trump is also recognizing what many of us see, that bureaucracies weaponize these kinds of financial services, and they weaponize language like reputational risk, right? Because what exactly does that mean? They get to fill it in a way, the way they please. It also highlights the importance that the state has a duty to protect the finances of its citizens, not abuse them, right? And so there is a policy shift here in the United States that is inspiring, that could inspire more Canadians. It certainly has sort of given me food for thought about how Alberta should do the same.
Wow, you've given me a lot. And I did see that tweet by Tamara Leach, and I forgot about it. So she actually wasn't even allowed to have a meeting with Alberta Treasury branches. I tell you, if Bible Bill Aberhart were around, he would say,
His
what has the ATB become? It was
his head was
about
spinning.
standing
Yeah,
up for Albertans.
yeah.
Very interesting. Well, listen, it's great to catch up with you. We've been talking with Marco Navarro-Genie. He's the Vice President of Research for the Frontiers Center. What's the best website we can see your stuff?
Our website is fcpp.org, and you can find all
FCPP. Got it.
.org.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for this. Lots of food for thought. And hopefully some of this will see some action. I'm going to think some more about Tamara Leach's case. She's so compelling. She was victimized once by Ottawa. She should not be victimized again by the Alberta Treasury branches. Great to see you, Marco. And folks,
Thank
stay
you.
with us. There's more ahead. We'll talk to you again soon.